Hello, welcome back to our third recording of Resist. So far, we've read Nazis in the Night, Cabbage Heads, Pea Break, On Stage, Independence, Dead or Alive, and today we are going to read about Rupert and a chapter called Be Brave as well. And as I read, make sure you continue to listen for what dangers Samaria encounters and if you think she's being brave or foolish. And again, you want to support your answer with evidence from the text to support what you think if she's being brave or foolish. So next chapter, Rupert. Samaria blinked in surprise. She had been imagining things when she thought of a man hanging from his parachute cord as a dummy filled with straw. But that's exactly what he was. The dummy wore an imitation of a soldier's uniform, complete with a helmet and boots. But underneath, he was only a rough burlap cloth that had been hastily sewn and stuffed in the shape of a person, a very small person. From the ground, the dummy looked like it was a regular sized human being. It must have been a trick of perspective, because up close the dummy didn't look much like a man at all. Instead, his head was pear-shaped, its chest was a rectangle, and its arms and legs were perfectly straight and disproportioned. Stenciled on his burlap chest was the name Rupert. "Aren't you a little short for a paratrooper?" Samaria asked. Rupert didn't answer, of course. He didn't make a noise. Now that Samaria was up close, she understood that this was where the sounds of the battle were coming from. There was a tiny speaker inside Rupert, playing a recording of gunshots and mortar explosions. Samaria smiled. With a clever trick to drop dummies over Normandy and make the Nazis run all over the place trying to fight Allied soldiers who weren't really there. Samaria's stomach suddenly tied itself into knots. If the Allied paratroopers weren't real, if this was all a trick, did that mean the Allies weren't really invading France tonight? Or that they were invading somewhere else, farther to the north, where France was closer to England, or farther south, where the German defenses were weaker? Samaria's arms and legs went limp, and she had to hug the tree not to fall off. If the Allies weren't really invading this part of Normandy, the Nazis in Beirut would be distracted in the morning, and her mother and all the other prisoners would be shot at dawn. The reality of it sank in, and Samaria felt herself tearing up again, all night long. Ever since her mother had been captured by the Nazis, she had pinned her hopes for her mother's rescue on the Allied soldiers coming up from the beaches and dropping from the planes. But if the invasion here was nothing more than a bunch of dummies meant to draw German attention away from the real invasion happening somewhere else, no one was coming to save Samaria's mother, which meant she was going to have to do it herself. Samaria wiped the tears from her eyes and got down to business. Rupert might not be a real soldier, but he could still help Samaria with her mission. That helmet would fit, and so would those boots. And that recording inside him, a recording of gunshots and explosions, it could be very helpful if she could somehow remove the device and take it with her. Keeping one arm wrapped around the tree trunk, Samaria began to loosen Rupert's uniform. The dummy kept spinning on his cords and swinging away from her, and when she reached out to grab hold of him again, she yanked down too hard. The parachute tangled up in the branches above her and tore with a sound like ripping paper. And suddenly, Rupert went tumbling down through the branches. Samaria watched him fall like the rag doll he was, and Serrano ran away in fear of the plummeting thing. When the dummy hit the ground and kaboom, it exploded into a ball of fire. Next chapter is called Be Brave. "Serrano!" Samaria cried. Her first thought was for her loyal companion, but a moment later Serrano danced back into view, barking angrily at the dummy for exploding and scaring him like that. Relieved, Samaria hastily climbed down the tree. Black smoke and the smell of burning burlap filled her nose. To avoid Rupert's fiery remains, she leaped down from higher up than she would have liked. She landed in a heap and scuffed her knees in the fall. Serrano ran over to welcome her, then was off to bark at the burning dummy again. Samira hobbled over to see that Rupert was almost gone. There hadn't been much of him to begin with, and now there was just a charred spot on the ground where he had landed. Even his helmet and boots, Samira realized, had been made out of paper mache. The whole thing had been designed to explode and burn, leaving almost no trace of what it had been. The recording that had been inside was nothing more than a few burnt wires and a melted battery. Rupert wasn't going to be any help to her after all. Worse, the explosion had alerted some German soldiers nearby. Samira could hear them calling out to each other, saw their electric torches flashing across the field. It was time for her and Serrano to exit stage left, and fast. She snatched up the little dog and ran away from the Nazis, towards Beirut and her mother. Samaria was tired, so tired. She just wanted to be a kid again, just wanted to go to school and have normal problems like homework and tests and girls who teased her. But this was her life now, and she had to be brave, braver than she had ever been before, brave like her mother. Samaria thought about her mother as she ducked and ran and slipped through the fields and hedgerows. Her mother had been brave enough to leave her home in Algeria and come here to France before the war to study law. How many women did that? And then when the war started and the Nazis rolled into Paris, Samaria's mom had to be brave again. Her husband, Samaria's father, was killed in the streets protesting the Nazis. That awful night, while 7-year-old Samaria had wanted to do nothing more than bury her head under the pillow and cry, Zenza Zidane had bundled up her daughter, thrown everything they could take with them in a knapsack, and carried them both away into the night. Carried her daughter and everything they owned through the towns and fields and villages, hiding out from the Nazis all the way until they found refuge here in Normandy among friends from the university. Then, almost immediately, Smaria's mother began working for the French resistance. Mostly she had run messages to and from the resistance fighters hiding in the woods at night, taking Samaria along with her under the pretense of taking her sick daughter to the doctor. But more than once they had been asked to house down Allied bomb pilots working their way back north to cross the Channel to England. If the German army ever found out any of the Allied soldiers hiding in Samaria's house, she and her mother both would have been killed by the Nazis. It was a risk Samaria's mother had never questioned. Kenza Zidane was the bravest person Samaria knew, and now Samaria had to rely on her own bravery to save her mother's life, the way her mother had saved so many others. Behind the dark field where Samaria walked, something crackled and cracked, making her jump. Samaria spun around. Exploding through the treetops, coming for a landing right on top of her, was an Allied airplane. And that is the end of the chapter called Be Brave. Take a little time now and just share in your Canvas page what dangers does Samaria encounter and if she is being brave or foolish in her adventure.